Ready?
Yeah, all set. Now, we're talking now about Book 3, entitled God's Speaking. And we just completed, as Ross went over, the most personal moment in the poem, where Francis very much speaks in a personal voice. It's the individual lover singing to the beloved there. Now, Francis goes to the very opposite end of the spectrum, to the most impersonal, to the story of the divine theme and God's seeking himself in it through his creation. It's the heart of Stay With God that is most explicitly linked to God Speaks, because it retells the story of the divine theme, which is really the core of God Speaks. And it's worth mentioning here that during that very same month of November 1955, when Francis and Don Stevens were invited as the only Westerners to Hafiz Indians, which was an occasion in which Baba wanted the intimacy of exchange between himself and his lovers. It was a Sahabas, not a darshan. At that very historical moment, in that very month, God Speaks was published. So you brought together the two extreme opposites, the beloved with his intimacy with his lovers on the one hand, and God Speaks, this cosmic statement of the impersonal God, you might say. So the same opposition is expressed in these two books of Stay With God, between the Love Song of John Carey and God Speaking. Another point that has really impressed me, and as in the months preceding this weekend, is how well Francis got to know God Speaks in a very short period of time. I mean, right now we've had 50 years to assimilate it, and I know it took me a long time before I got to know it to the extent that I do. Certainly I didn't right off the bat. But Francis's the acuity of his knowledge of God Speaks, reflected especially in this one section, is most impressive. Now, this is a representation of the divine theme, which is what Book 3 is about. In fact, it's what God Speaks is about too. And of course, most of you would be well familiar with this chart. The divine theme has we could represent it in terms of 5 elements. The creation of the universe. It's a storyline. It's the biography of the soul, the journey of the soul from the original state to the realization of God. After that original beyond state is the creation originating in the whim of God to know himself. There's the evolution of consciousness through the 7 kingdoms, in which the jivatma, or the soul, acquires consciousness through the mechanism of sanskaras, acquiring more and more sanskaras. Reincarnation in human form through 84 lakhs of rebirths. The involutionary journey through the planes of the subtle and mental spheres to the realization of God. That is, of course, the divine theme, which is beautifully represented in this chart, which has just vanished from sight. Here we go. By the way, this chart was not published in the first edition of God Speaks. It only appeared in the second edition in 1973. So here you see the original beyond state. And here's the evolutionary journey, culminating in the achievement of man form and the reincarnationary cycle of 8,400,000 lifetimes. And here's the involutionary journey. That's the core narrative of God Speaks, which, as I understand that book, God Speaks goes through that narrative 3 times. 3 passes through the divine theme. In God Speaking, Francis goes through it 4 times, actually. And God Speaking, that book is divided into 4 sections plus a coda. Each section has 10 stanzas of 10 lines each, and the coda is 1 stanza of 10 lines each. And of all the sections in Stay with God, this is the one that most seems to employ the method of theme and variation. There's a common theme in each section. He retells the story of the divine theme each time, from start to finish. But in each of the 4 major passes and in the 1 short pass, he tells it differently. And it's not easy to give a simple formula for the difference between sections. They're very subtle, the variations, but the way in which he develops and varies is quite beautiful. People often comment that there's a lot of Beethoven in Stay with God. I don't know whether Francis himself said that, but it does occur to me that this is a book of Stay with God where that would be evident. Theme and variation was not invented by Beethoven by a long shot, but he was a master of it. We do see it here. Going over then these a little bit about some of the 4 passes through it. The first pass, and I put this up because this actually, the 10 States of God, is another version of the divine theme. We could go through it on another occasion, but this is the evolutionary journey, involutionary journey. But you see a lot of stuff up here, the 8th, 9th, and 10th states of God, of Majub, Jivatma, Sadguru. Francis doesn't go into that. It's actually, he doesn't talk about that very much in Stay with God, those things. It's really, this book is really about the divine theme as such, this narrative of the journey of the soul, for the most part. Okay. And it's introduced by this message that Baba gave, which we read yesterday. And I would presume, there are 3 new messages that Baba gave specifically for inclusion in this book. And I would presume that Baba was inspired to give this message by this book of Stay with God. And actually, what the emphasis of Baba's message is the original word, not the divine theme as such, but that sound. So it finds its place right before the beginning of the 3rd book, which is exactly the right place for it. I won't say any more about that, even though it would be wonderful fun to spend 2 hours going over just that one message. Now, the first pass through, I'll just bring out a couple of the emphases in it. The first one is he spends a stanza or 2 in his first pass through the divine theme talking about the original state. Each of the 4 passes, in fact, in the Coda 2, begins once God slept. This time it's more developed. Once God, that great being whose nature is existence, knowledge, and bliss, slept. Each succeeding one begins once God slept. So there are certain repeating themes in the 4 passes through the divine theme. But then he goes talking about what that divine sound sleep state is like. When he gets to reincarnation, Francis develops this more than in any of the other passes. So in a way, this first section emphasizes that state where we are, the reincarnation state. And I'd like to read it, partly because the poetry is so beautiful, and because it does show one of those themes we talked about earlier, the moon and the sun, the Jalali and the Jamali, those aspects, God's gentleness and God's wrath, that fundamental dichotomy. The first stanza we'll look at is about the moon side. This is about reincarnation now, and he's describing in this stanza the romance of it. Look at how beautiful this poetry is. As man, he loved his loves and suffered his loves. Sunbeat and rain hail, dew of love, whirlpool and dark wave and threatening rocks, warm swirl of the surf's backrush around the ankles, and fine sand suspended like worlds in the water. Isn't that wonderful? Salt on eyes and mouth, taste of salt on her mouth. You get that erotic element here. And the moon come up huge and yellow. Warm honey of kisses. Warm honey with slight salt. Isn't that marvelous?
Mm.
And the pounding of the earth shaker. Poseidon. Here he brings in that heroic theme, which actually has been coming up throughout the entire poem. Poseidon is the Greek god of the ocean. And the dream sleep, the breeze in the dawn, stirring a wisp of her lovely hair. So this is reincarnation in its positive aspect with intimations of the divine romance. But now we get this other side, that sun, the fiery aspect of things that destroys all of this. And the night of moon ended, and the honey eaten of her mouth. And the stars of her eyes fled back into the wells whereof sky. And the sun come up again in the clear sky, or murk of another day. And the setting out on wash of dark wave. Now look at the imagery he uses here. Along the hammered streets, lined with open mouths and protruding tongues of Kali. Have you ever seen those images of Kali? Blood all over the place. Licking victims and votaries into blast furnaces. Goose-stepping them to the rhythm of typewriter keys. That's just fantastic. This was right after World War II, goose-stepping, the new goose-stepping Nazis. So on the one hand, the beautiful moon, huge and yellow, and her wisp of her hair, and kisses, and honey, and salt. But then the other side is this. This is the other side. So he's showing reincarnation, its positive and its negative aspects. You know, that's why you need months to study this poem. Just to look at the splendors of the poetry and of the poetic expression of these things. I just picked up these two from this first pass. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well maybe that will be, I'll just say this much about the other sections. Let's see. The 4 times through, the second time he spends a lot more time on evolution and the building of houses and bricks, building houses out of bricks. And the last stanza of the second pass is really the most beautiful statement of realization. I'd recommend it highly. The third pass, Baba skips evolution completely and begins in human form. And the second half of it, the stanzas 6 through 10, is the master. Odysseus returned, and you hear his voice giving advice and guidance to the seeker. And the fourth pass, Francis brings up another image, the image of a tree. And evolution is compared to a tree. And in the second half of it, it's very, very wonderful. I would love to spend much more time on this. We did in some of our sessions here the last 2 weeks. And the second half is more about houses and the dissolving of houses into the realization of God. So this is a splendid artistic expression of theme and variation. Okay, any questions? What time we have? How much time do we have?
Couple of minutes, 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, in that the first slide, there was this, I think the second line, existence, knowledge, and bliss. Do you have any thoughts as to why Francis didn't use the word power? Which is the usual thing that's used.
Existence, knowledge, and bliss is probably a translation of Satchit and Anand, which means something like that. Sat is existence, Chit is kind of consciousness, and Anand is bliss. But he has knowledge, power, bliss sometimes also.
Yeah.
That's a point I've observed also.
Mm-hmm. In that last fourth variation, brings the tree of life.
Yeah.
I think it's just a wonderful thing, because in the Christian story, the reader's supposed to be Christian. You know, you're flung out of the garden, eating that fruit is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Sin comes, and God shoots himself in the foot, and the whole thing goes wrong.
Mm.
Here, he says this beautiful thing, eat of this fruit, it's a necessary, it's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Which is a beautiful statement of that. You know,
You
just
know,
sort
what
of-
we were reading yesterday, there's a stanza where Francis does say, in Eden, there's no opportunity for love there.
yeah,
Angels, great for angels.
yeah, it's boring basically, it's a limbo.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're on this side of Eden, this is where it happens.
There's a magnificent treatment of the theme of the tree in the Bhagavad Gita also. I think it's book 16 or 15. It's an upside down tree, actually. I wonder if Francis was cognizant of, he must have read
Yeah.
Bhagavad Gita. Yes, you.
I'm reading the book. If one didn't have the above background, do you think one would get anything out of it? Do you think they'd get much from the literary, stuff?
It would depend a lot on who one was. You'd have to be quite open-minded, but it certainly is full of visionary splendors. And this book is an example of that. I don't know if one could follow it or not. You should catch someone in Maroochydore, force them to read it. Yeah. Okay, and now for book 4. Jeff will be taking us on steps to his